Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Foundation for Peripheral Neuropathy's Patient Education webinar. Today, we will be exploring travel tips and continuing interest in adaptive travel, featuring guest speaker Craig Kennedy. I want to take a quick moment to acknowledge and thank today's webinar sponsor, CSL Behring. With their support, we're able to make this program available to our patients and caregivers. And again, thank you, CSL Behring, for sponsoring this important topic. Now, my name is Lindsay Colbert. I am the Executive Director of the Foundation for Peripheral Neuropathy. I want to thank everyone for entrusting us with your educational experience on all things related to peripheral neuropathy. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. First, this program is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Foundation for Peripheral Neuropathy's website in perpetuity. A copy of the presentation will also be available on our website for future reference. Towards the end of the program, we will be answering a Q&A for our friends who are joining us live. If you have any questions that are about this topic and are in general in nature, I encourage you to use the questions box located in the dashboard of your display to ask our expert for more details. We will try our best to answer as many as we can. And now I am pleased to introduce you to our expert today, Mr. Craig Kennedy. Craig is a program coordinator and trainer with the Open Doors organization with more than 20 years of experience working with people with disabilities, disability travel and tourism, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Craig moved to Steamboat Springs, Colorado from the Adirondacks in upstate New York in 1994, where a skiing accident left him paralyzed from the waist down just 2 years later. Craig now lives in the Knoxville, Tennessee area and is an avid traveler. Spending more than 150 days per year on the road and having flown close to 500,000 miles in his wheelchair, he brings a very unique perspective to traveling with a disability. A publisher, author, and co-founder of an adaptive travel resource company called Access Anything with his wife Andy and founder of CK Consulting, he has spent more than 20 years motivating people with disabilities to look beyond their perceived abilities and advocating for their rights as both people and travelers. He also spent 10 years as a founding board member and program director for Steamboat Adaptive Recreational Sports, helping to grow that adaptive sports program from the ground up while teaching others with disabilities how to ski and recreate in the outdoors. Craig brings an infectious positive attitude with him wherever he goes and hopes to affect positive change, better health, and improved access to the world of disabilities. And with that, I pass the virtual mic over to you, Craig. Thank you again for sharing your expertise with us today.
Of course. Thank you for the wonderful intro, Lindsay, and I'm very, very happy to be here. I want to let you guys know why I'm all bundled up here. I know it's cold in Chicago this morning, but I'm currently in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, where I still spend a couple months a year, and it was minus 40 with the wind chill this morning. So the room that I'm in had a heat pump blow. It's a little cold in here, so I'm just trying to stay warm. But again, Lindsay, thank you for having me. Like you said, I have a very unique perspective on all this. I think I'm sitting in a wheelchair. Obviously, you can't see that, but I'm a T12 paraplegic from a skiing accident, which I'll tell you about in just a second. But most of the travel, almost all the travel I've done has been from the standpoint of being in a wheelchair. So it gives me, I think, a very unique perspective. I moved to Steamboat Springs about, almost 30 years ago. It was 1994. And I was working up on the mountain, waiting tables at a fancy restaurant that you had to ski to get to. I waited lunch. Really cool job, and, because I got to ski on my way to work and I got to ski on my way leaving work, which was great. Well, at the end of my second season, I had a bad accident. I skied down a steep run that I had not skied before, and it was late afternoon, so the light was very flat, and there was a transition, a road that had a drop off, and I just didn't see it. And I went flying. I was going very fast. When I woke up, ski patrol was already there. And the three questions that I'll never forget, I remember as soon as I opened my eyes, they asked me three things. Do you know who you are? I did. Do you know where you are? I knew where I was. And can you feel your legs? That was the big question that changed my life, really, because I remember specifically saying, no, I cannot feel my legs. So I spent a little time at the local hospital, and then they put me into a morphine-induced coma. I was in pretty bad shape. and they flew me down to Denver, and then a Flight for Life helicopter to Swedish Medical Center, where I spent about 2.5 days in ICU before I stabilized enough to go in for 10 hours of surgery. My parents had flown in, my step parents had flown in, and like I said, I was in rough shape. I broke 9 vertebrae in your thoracic region. Thoracic means chest in the medical world. So I broke 9 of the 12 in my thoracic. The worst of, luckily, was a low fracture at T11, which is really just below your belly button, and that was a burst fracture. So the bone exploded, sent shards of bone, into my spinal column, and that's what cut off the feeling and the messaging. So I've been a complete T12 paraplegic for almost 30 years. Complete just means I don't have any feeling or movement below my injury line. Different from my boss. I work for a company called the Open Doors Organization, and we work in disability travel and tourism all over the world. So I love that I actually get paid to travel now and do this, but I'm definitely here representing the Open Doors Organization for sure, which ironically is based in Chicago, right by the airport, right in Rosemont. So um, the biggest decision I had to make, well, there were 2 things that I like to talk about. The first thing was, um, the first time I sat up, I remember after a few weeks of laying down, and the first thought in my head was, oh my God, who's going to take care of me? And I had to get past that, because I feel like most people don't lose their independence until you get much later in life, in your 70s and 80s, when your kids take the car keys away from you, you can't drive your friends anymore. I experienced that at a very young age in my early 20s, and it was very difficult for me. Luckily, I made the decision to move back to Steamboat. Some friends of mine that lived up here really encouraged me. I was also encouraged by the support of the community because they had a couple of big fundraisers for me. They raised like $50,000. Just the town gathered around me, and I said, you know what, that's my family, and that's where I need to be. So I moved back to Steamboat, and that was the best decision I made because every time my friends were going somewhere, they said, hey, let's go, we're going. And I said, no, I don't know if I can do that. And they said, get your ass in the car, we're taking you with us, right? So they forced me to be more independent, and that was one of the toughest things for me to deal with, was the whole independence thing. So that's a little bit about me. You can see by the pictures up here that I kind of like action and adventure, and I like to travel. On the top left there, that's me skiing. Yes, I broke my back skiing, and I still ski. Um, I took almost a year off. At the end of the next season, I actually got into a sit ski for the first time and never looked back, and then helped to start the adaptive program, learn to teach. But skiing is my passion. That's why I come back to Steamboat for January and February every year, which are the coldest months of the year, but they're also the snowiest, which is why I'm here. Next to that is a trip we did a long time ago, my wife and I, to Alaska. I love being on the water on a sea kayak. You can see the next one over, that's Half Dome, Yosemite. That was a scary spot to sit. I will tell you guys, you can't really see, but the edge is right there and it drops off pretty good. But I've also got into rock climbing. I love to travel. On the bottom left, that's a trip I took to Dominica in the Caribbean. Next to that, if you've never been to Dubai, that was at the top of the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa. And I took that picture because I thought it was cool that you could see all of the skyscrapers way down below me. And then there's a picture of me and my friend Joel. That's who I live with here in Steamboat while I'm here. He's from Chicago, and that's a famous shot from Chicago with the river there. And then on the bottom right, that's my wife and I in Scotland. That is up in Inverness at St. Andrews Golf Course. So again, I love to travel. I love adventure. It's my absolute favorite thing to do. I've been to all 50 states. I've been to 50 plus national parks and monuments around the country. Let me think. Out of the country, England, Scotland, Ireland, Italy, Germany, Belgium, France, all over Europe, of course, Dubai, the Netherlands, Mexico, Canada, Dominica, Trinidad and Tobago, Chile. I get around. It's, again, absolutely my favorite thing to do. So I also do want to point out, as I'm talking today, right, I do realize we've got some older travelers in the group here, and my parents are 80 and 81 now. And even though they're starting to slow down, they both ironically have some neuropathy in their lower legs. So this hits home for me. but they still don't consider themselves disabled, which is, I believe, where most of this group will be, right? So I'm not talking to you as somebody with a disability, just in the context that no matter what state you're in, no matter what your current ability level, you can still get out and travel and have fun and have adventures. So with that said, you can go to the next slide, please. And it's getting a little bit warmer in here, which is nice. I can take my hat off. So now I want to talk about some of the current trends in adaptive travel, because there's a lot more ways to travel just than by air. But if you are traveling by air, I have some good tips on that as well. So let's go to the next slide, please. And let's start with cruising. So I've been traveling a long time. One of the first things I always wanted to do, which ironically I didn't get to do until just a couple of years ago, is go on a cruise, right? There are certain industries that have embraced our community of disabled and older travelers a long time ago. They realized that a lot of older travelers like to cruise and that they needed to make their boats much more accessible. So instead of having one or two accessible cabins on a yacht or on a big cruise ship, they now have 20 or 30 accessible cabins so that there's plenty of room for everybody. I got to go on my first cruise to Jamaica about 2.5 years ago, I believe it was, and it was a wonderful experience. It was Royal Caribbean. The boat was very, very accessible. They even had benches in the shower and bigger rooms for wheelchairs. They really had everything. It is like a floating city with elevators and good access everywhere you go. And any of the big companies like Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, Princess Cruises, they all do a wonderful job if that's the experience you're looking for. The latest trend, however, some of you may know, is actually smaller cruise ships, such as Viking cruises. They do river trips, they do intercoastal trips, and instead of having 4,000 or 5,000 people on the boat, you have 400 or 500 people, or sometimes even less. My in-laws love the river cruises. They love the smaller boats. I think they've gone on 6 or 7 trips probably in the last 8 years, and mostly on these smaller boats, and they really, really enjoy them. So, there's the Baltic, there's the Great Lakes, there's the intercoastal. They just did an intercoastal down the East Coast, all the way down to Florida, and they said it was just amazing. They've even been on a smaller cruise ship going through the Amazon. So, cruising, wide open, a lot smaller ships nowadays, if that's what you're into. You leave your stuff on board, you get on and off. And the only real thing to consider with cruising is, I've told you that the boats are very accessible. You may still have to do some homework when it comes to getting off of the boat, right? So just make sure you're very forthcoming, whenever you travel, however you travel. Give people the information, tell them exactly what you need. And even if you don't need the use of a wheelchair in everyday life, there may be a situation where you get to a train station or an airport and it's a little bit daunting and you've got bags. So don't be afraid to ask for some help if you need it, right? I know my dad, tough guy, he has a hard time asking for help. So I have to, sometimes we have to ask him and make sure he takes the help. But cruising is a wonderful thing. Just make sure you do your homework on the ports that you're going to, and make sure you ask about activity providers and whatever else you might need for your specific travel needs. Okay, let's go on to the next one. And let's talk about air travel. So a couple things that a lot of people don't know about air travel is that there's an entire different law. It's in play when you get onto the airplane, right? When you are in the parking garage, you are in the airport, that is covered by the ADA, which I'm sure you've all heard of, the Americans with Disabilities Act. That covers our physical environment and equal access to public services and things like that. But as soon as you step onto the jetway and walk down and onto that plane, the ADA is behind you and the Air Carrier Access Act is in front of you. This is important because they're two different laws. The ADA doesn't cover airlines. It doesn't cover air trips. It covers the airport, but it doesn't cover the actual airplane. The reason for that is because the Air Carrier Access Act, which is part of the DOT's Code of Federal Regulations, actually came out 4 years before the ADA. So when you're on an airplane and you feel like your rights are violated, or you haven't got the service that you should, or it's an extra long wait, maybe you're getting wheelchair service because you've had to wait 15 or 20 minutes, that becomes unequal. And that's where the Air Carrier Access Act steps in and says, hey, you have rights as a person with a disability, or if you're traveling with any kind of mobility aid, crutches, a cane, a rollator, as you see on the screen there, which are very popular nowadays, or a walker of some sort. Um, any of these things are important, right? And we need to take care of them. So with air travel, if they break your equipment or anything like that, they have to cover it and they have to repair it. But what a lot of people don't know, and what is unfortunately not offered up front, is that you can take a lot of these mobility devices on the airplane. Any kind of manual wheelchair, as long as it fits in the closet. Now, this is airplanes of 100 seats or more, so it has to be on a big plane. But if there's a closet on board, that is priority stowage for mobility equipment. So when I fly, I take my wheels off of my chair, I take my seat cushion, and I give them the frame that goes underneath. Everything else goes on the plane, either in the closet or on the overhead. And we're allowed to do this for no extra charge. That's the key, right? So anything that you're worried about being broken, a CPAP machine, a portable oxygen concentrator, a portable dialysis machine, any of these things are all allowed on the airplane with you for no extra charge, right? And I will also say, depending on what kind of mobility device you do or might use, there are a lot of lightweight options nowadays, lightweight travelable power chairs, lightweight scooters that weigh 60 or 70 pounds. They're very easy to travel with. There are also other devices such as Smart Drive or a Firefly, right? So some people that use wheelchairs have a power assist in the middle of their wheel hub, and it actually gives you extra power. Um, the one thing that I really want is says Firefly there, and you can Google what this looks like, but it's basically a set of handlebars with a wheel on the front and a motor, and you connect it to the front of your manual wheelchair, and it turns you into a moped. So that's kind of at the top of my list. But just know, anytime you're navigating an airport, number one, according to the Air Carrier Access Act, the airline has to provide a wheelchair service or even just a meet and assist service. So maybe you don't need a wheelchair to get to the gate, but you need some help getting to the gate, and somebody can walk with you, or maybe you can ride in a cart. But again, I'll reiterate, please don't be afraid to ask for help, because airports have gotten bigger and bigger. There are some concourses I've been on where it's a half mile or more to your next gate. And in some cases, there may not be chairs along the way that you can sit down and rest, right? So having something like a walker or rollator to sit on, could be helpful as well. But again, don't be afraid to ask for help. It's there, it's free. And the best way to get this service is to actually tell them ahead of time what you need, right? Because if you get to the airport and it's busy and you didn't tell them you were coming, the people that planned the help ahead of time, those are the priority, and that's according to the law as well. So again, don't be afraid to ask for help, and I would do it ahead of time. Give the airline all the information, let them know what you need, and they are very good at helping. Very good at helping. Then there's also an organization called Travelers Aid. I think they're in 20 or 30 countries, something like that. Now, this is not just for people that use mobility devices. It's not for just older travelers. It's for anybody that needs any kind of travel aid. I'll give you an example. I was coming back from the island of Dominica last year, and I had a flat tire on my wheelchair, right? So when I got to the Chicago airport, I had called our office in Chicago, which is near the airport. Um, had somebody go buy me a tube. They brought it to the airport, gave it to Travelers Aid. Travelers Aid brought it through security. I picked it up at their desk. I had a pump with me, and I changed my tire right in the airport. So they can do a lot of things, from navigation to just general help. Travelers Aid is a wonderful organization. The other thing you can do if you are traveling with some kind of disability, and again, if it's neuropathy and you're just maybe a little bit of a slow walker, you don't consider that a disability, that doesn't mean you can't ask for help. If you have trouble going through TSA, they actually have a hotline you can call. It's called TSA Cares. And you can call them ahead of time and say, hey, I'm coming. I might need some extra help through security. And they will meet you even out at the curb or at the door of the airport, and they will help you through the entire process of getting through security, which I think is great. or if you're already in line going through security and you have any kind of issue, look for the TSA agent that has a gold bar, a gold band on their shoulder. This is a brand new thing. They're called a passenger service specialist. They work for the TSA and they have been trained to be more empathetic to people's needs, right? Which we all know as you're going through TSA, if you've ever had a bad experience, they don't necessarily like to show empathy, but the PSS will help you. That's what they're trained to do, and they wear a gold bar, I believe it is, on one of their shoulders. Let me think. I think I covered everything there. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, I think we can move on. And of course, we will be taking questions at the end. So if you guys have questions, please write them down, get them into the question box, and we will answer those at the end. All right, so here's some great pictures. Again, there's a couple places. Well, one of these places I haven't been. I haven't been to Sydney, Australia. That's on the bottom. Then you've got Paris, and then that's Las Vegas. So just like the cruise lines a long time ago embraced this community of older and disabled travelers, so have a few cities around the world. Las Vegas was the first to do it, right? Older travelers do love to go to Las Vegas and have a good time. And it's probably the most accessible city that I've ever been to in any of my travels. Las Vegas is very, very accessible. Orlando, same thing. You know, you've got Disney down there and a lot of older travelers and a lot of older people living down there. Orlando is a very accessible place. I spent a lot of time there as well for work, doing work with JetBlue and some other folks. Denver, that's my home. That was my home city for a long time. Denver is a wonderfully accessible city, and there's a lot to do there. And if you don't want to just be in the city, you can get into the mountains within an hour, hour and a half to any number of locations, and then your whole scenery changes even from there. But it is just a gorgeous place. Love Denver. And then Washington, D.C. This is where my wife grew up, so I've spent a lot of time there as well. Also, one of the most accessible places, definitely in this country, if not the world. And you know, they have these wonderful buses you can just get on and off. They drop you right in front of the monuments, and it's a super easy way to get around. The last time I did it, they had to bring it. They brought in a bus for me. It had a lift on it, and I think my wife and I were the only ones on the bus for a while, even. So, very accessible places. Internationally, Paris, you know, surprisingly, it's an old city, but I had a wonderful time in Paris. There were a few challenges, but overall, I was very happy. Tokyo, Sydney, I have not been to these cities, but I did some research and they definitely brag about their accessibility. Tokyo, in fact, Japan, so you guys know, has the largest aging population in the world. They are the creators of what's called universal design, where we don't talk about things that are accessible and not accessible. We just talk about how everything, when you build it, is designed so that it works for everybody. It works universally for everybody. So Tokyo has got to be a very accessible place. I have been to Rome and Dublin. So basically, for me, being in a wheelchair, I know that any major city around the world where the Olympics have been, there's going to be some pretty good access because the Olympics have been there. And what most people may not realize is that 2 weeks after the Olympics are over every Olympic year, then come the Paralympics, and those are for all the athletes with disabilities, physical disabilities that compete. They're in the same city, so when that city builds for the Olympics, they also have to build things accessible. So in Rome, for instance, there's an elevator in the Parthenon. Well, sorry, that's in Greece, in Athens, Greece. But in Rome, I had wonderful accessibility. I was able to get into the Colosseum and all of the major sites. It was really wonderful. The only issue is some of the cobblestone and things like that. You know, for some of you guys, I don't know if any of you guys use scooters, but that is something that I'm looking at for my folks now. And my father-in-law uses one now. He's got some neuropathy in his legs as well. Scooters are a wonderful way to get around, and you may even be able to rent a scooter depending on where you're going. I know they rent them for sure in Las Vegas and Orlando at Disney. And then there's probably ways to rent scooters in other places if you don't have your own lightweight scooter. But generally, the bigger the city, the more access you're going to have. As you get away from the city into the country, some smaller towns, you might not have as good of access. But generally in the large cities, you're going to get a good amount of access. Okay, let's move on to the next one. All right, so Amtrak is a specialty of mine. We have been doing training off and on with Amtrak since 2011. We've trained thousands of their employees, frontline from top to bottom. Even their CEO has been through our training. And for the last 3.5 years, I want to say we've been running 50 to 60 trainings in about 18 to 20 different cities every single month for the last 3.5 years for Amtrak. And it's really based around accessibility, and their accessibility is getting a lot better, I want to tell you. Long distance trains are so much fun. I have been on a train from Chicago to LA. That was 2 overnights. I think it was a 45-hour trip. I've been from Chicago to New York City, which was absolutely gorgeous. And then I've been on the auto train, which goes from DC, Lorton, Virginia, all the way down to just north of Orlando and drops you in Florida. My in-laws did this for many years when they were still living in DC, and now they're down in Sarasota. So the long distance trains are fun. You know, you're going across the country, and whether you're flying, which you're flying above the clouds, you can't really see much on the ground, right? You get there quickly. That's a great way to travel, but you don't experience the landscape. Even if you're in a car, you're stuck on a road, right? The trains do not always follow the road. You can see this picture. It's right along the river in Colorado. This is the Zephyr train that goes all the way over the Rocky Mountains into San Francisco, I believe. But you get to see, landscape that you wouldn't see from an airplane and you wouldn't see from a car. It's a little bit slower pace. Well, it's a lot slower pace than an airplane. And just the scenery it's really phenomenal. I got to see, I remember my trip from Chicago to New York City. You get to Albany, New York around sunset, and then you head south into the city. And when we traveled, it was in February or March, and we got sunset like on the Hudson River all the way down to New York City. It was just gorgeous. And then one of the ones I haven't done is up into the Canadian Rockies. The Canadian Rockies are even more majestic than our Rockies. They just kind of take it to a next level. And then as far as accessibility, they've been improving a lot. When Joe Biden took office, he put several $billion into our train infrastructure. So you're seeing brand new stations. For instance, in New York, they built a brand new $1 billion station called Moynihan Train Hall, which is the old post office. But they've dumped money into stations, platforms, raising and lowering platforms to make it more accessible for folks in wheelchairs. They have lifts. And of course, as you know, we've been training them. And I'm very happy to say the training is really effective, guys. I think because 99% of our trainers actually have a disability. They live in different parts of the country. We assign them. I have blind trainers, I have deaf trainers, I have trainers in wheelchairs, I have amputee that's a trainer, a little of everything. So, learning from the disability community is the best way, I think, for them to really know, what the needs of our older travelers especially are. I will say, depending, I don't know exactly what age group you guys are all in, but we have the second or third largest aging population in the world, right? So I think it's 25% of our population in the US is 65 and over, right? So the other good thing about all these travel outlets is that they know our population is aging, and they're really starting to cater to the older traveler and their needs and wants. So Amtrak, highly recommended if you've never done it. It is a wonderful, wonderful way to travel, and it's just spectacular. I really love it. Can't say enough about Amtrak. All right, let's move on to the next one. So what are some other adventures? We've talked about, kind of the main modes of travel out there, but there are so many cool things going on with Airbnbs, and there's a picture down on the bottom right there. That is a B&B that's buried in the woods, and it's wheelchair accessible. I know it looks like there's stairs there, but there's a ramp on the back. So, they're designing these even universally. I actually came across in Southeast Tennessee. My wife and I last year, we're going to stay in a wheelchair accessible Airbnb treehouse that had this rope bridge ramp going right to the place, but it was literally up in a tree. So very cool stuff. But let's start with the chain hotels. Hilton, Marriott, IHG, which is the Holiday Inn chain. Any of the major hotel chains are going to be accessible, guys. Now, I'm not saying 100% accessible because I have issues being in a wheelchair. One of my biggest pet peeves, you get into a brand new bathroom and it's a tub with a fold down bench at one end so you can sit down. You have to stand up in the shower, which is where a lot of falls happen. They can be slippery. And then they put the controls way over on the other end of the bathtub, and once I'm on the bench, I can't reach them. So, little things like that for a permanent wheelchair user. You guys shouldn't have an issue with that, but the chain hotels, I think you'll have the best luck with. I'm a Hilton guy. I stay 70, 80 nights a year in Hiltons, probably something like that. And 98% of the time, I have a really good experience. So, and I've stayed in plenty of Marriotts and Holiday Inns and every other kind of hotel you can imagine. So, but that's where I would start typically is with the big chain hotels, because where Airbnb can certainly be a unique experience. I've had some issues just with people, they're renting their own house, so they don't really know what accessible is, or, everybody's kind of got their own definition. They might put a couple bars in the tub and call it good. But, I've checked into places that said they were accessible and the bathroom doors not wide enough for me to get through the door. So again, doing a little homework is certainly important. But Airbnb can be a lot of house. They have tree houses. You can stay on an island. There's cabins. There's tiny homes, which ironically, my wife and I live in the hills of Northeast Tennessee, off the grid, in a couple of yurts. And, so that's kind of my life now. But tiny homes are a real popular thing now, and they definitely rent those. They rent houseboats. Heck, I remember when I was in Scotland, my most recent trip to Scotland, we stayed in a wheelchair accessible Airbnb castle. And it was really, really cool to be in this old castle and actually stay there. It was really cool. I really enjoyed that. What else do we have here? Road trips. So this came up, back when gas got expensive again 10 years ago. The one tank of gas trip was very popular. So where can we go that we can use half a tank of gas, get around, have a good time, and still have enough gas to get home, right? It's affordable that way. You can bring whatever you want. You don't have to worry about things that you can't bring on the airplane. Your sunscreen tube is 5 ounces instead of 3.2, so they have to throw that away. All those little things that are a little bit annoying sometimes about flying. When you're on a road trip, you're in your own car, your own comfort. You can make your own decisions, your own timing. And again, you can bring whatever you want. And then this next one I talked about, I thought was really cool. I did some research on this. And after I did the presentation a couple months ago for a smaller group here for peripheral neuropathy, I actually had a message from one of the men that was on the call, and he said, I wanted to thank you for recommending Skip Gen Travel, because I had never thought of taking a trip with my grandson, and we just did, and we had an amazing trip. So this is a very new thing where grandparents are actually traveling with a grandchild, not necessarily with the whole family, but grandpa and grandson go on an adventure for a day or two, right? Which I think is good. It's good for the kids and it's good for the older traveler. I really think this is a cool idea, so some of you guys might think about something you haven't thought about in a while. You get to see your grandkids, I'm sure, but if you ever got to actually have some good one-on-one time with them, and would they be interested in that? So Skip Gen Travel is it's kind of becoming more and more popular these days. And again, part of it's because we have such a large aging population and people want to travel. And I got to imagine if you're traveling with your grandson or your granddaughter's got to make you feel younger and bring a lot of joy into your life. So, all right, let's move on. Let's go to the next one. So this is really the advice section, right? We've talked a lot about different ways to travel, but the best way to have a good experience and all the experience I have is to be prepared, right? Don't just book a trip and take their word for it. If you need accessibility, make sure you call and say, hey, is your place accessible? Yes, it is. Okay. How wide are your doorways? Right. This is how my wife and I started years and years ago, because the first time we traveled to Alaska, people made all these promises, and we get up there and stuff wasn't accessible. You know, the Airbnb we booked had this big, beautiful ramp going up around the back. And then to get in the door was like a 4-inch threshold. And that was difficult for me to go over. Is your bathroom accessible? Is your shower accessible? Absolutely. It's a roll-in shower. Well, I could roll into the bathroom and I could transfer into the shower, but the shower stall was so small that I had to shower with my feet hanging out of the shower stall, right? So it's little things like this that you don't expect. And I will reiterate again that everybody has their own definition of what accessible is, and depending on what your needs, of course. So make sure you don't take their word for it. Make a phone call, ask for measurements if you need them, because that's going to make your trip a lot better rather than showing up on the spot and them saying, oh, sorry, I guess it's not as accessible as we needed it to be. Right. So, and then I also stipulate between accessible and doable. I will tell you guys right now, as you can probably tell from my pictures and all my travels, I'm not your average wheelchair user. I do things that a lot of folks in wheelchairs don't do, because I personally, I think disability is up here, right? If you ask me right now today if I'm disabled, I will tell you no, I'm not disabled, but I am a wheelchair user. And there's a big difference because, again, disability is up here, and my brain doesn't think I'm disabled. I'm sitting in a wheelchair and I have to get around in a wheelchair, but that's not being disabled, right? That's how you feel about yourself. And again, I don't feel disabled. So, but I am a wheelchair user, which just for me just means I get to go faster down hills than everybody else. So, there are some things that are ADA accessible, which some people might need, but if you call up and they say we're not accessible, we'll get some details. Ask them what they mean by that, because it still might be doable for what your ability level is. And I think that's really important, right? Ask lots of questions, get measurements. I'll say that one more time. That was super important for me. And then bring extra supplies. For me, it's bathroom supplies. I'm very lucky that I don't take any medication. I take whole food supplements and things like that. I occasionally take some Advil, but I'm a very healthy, fit person, and I don't typically have to take medication, but I do have to have on a long trip a whole extra bag just of bathroom supplies so that I have what I need. If I'm going on a week-long trip, I bring 3 extra days of supplies. Why? You might get stuck. You might get snowed in. You might get, flights might get canceled. You never know what's going to happen. So I always plan for 3 extra days, whether it's medication, catheters, gloves, whatever I need for my own personal needs. I'm bringing 3 extra days, and I highly recommend you guys do that. That includes, bringing extra batteries for an oxygen concentrator or a CPAP or whatever you might need, because you may not be able to depend on the plug on an Amtrak train or on an airplane. We know they don't work sometimes. And on Amtrak, they're famous. Sometimes the power goes out. They have it restored pretty quickly, but if you're on a breathing machine and it's the middle of the night and the power goes out, that might cause you a problem. So I would definitely highly recommend bringing 100. We usually recommend bringing 150% of the batteries that you think you're going to need. Again, the trip might get longer. Sometimes I've seen Amtrak trains delayed for 3 or 4 hours before, sometimes longer, depending on what's going on with the tracks or a storm or debris on the tracks. You never know what's going to happen. It says 2 extra days there. I like to do 3, but bring at least 2 extra days of all your stuff that you're going to need, because you never know what's going to happen. And then some places, like if I had got stuck a couple extra days on the island of Dominica, I would have been okay with that for sure. There's certain places you don't mind getting stuck. That's for sure. So let's move on to, what it's like in the U.S. versus other countries, because I'm assuming some of you guys may be going out of the country at some point. I'm supposed to be going to London here at the end of the month, then over to Dublin. I really love traveling over in Europe. Europe is a fantastic place, but the U.S. has different laws than other places, right? There is disability legislation in Europe, Australia, even in the Middle East. Dubai is a very, very, very accessible place. You might be surprised. They pride themselves on their accessibility. They do have legislation, but they might be a little bit different, right? So You can certainly ask me if you're going somewhere. I can help you with that. But doing some research online might come in handy. So because as a U.S. citizen, I expect accessibility. When I travel out of the country, I don't necessarily expect it. I'm happy when I get it, but other countries have different laws, and you need to understand that. So don't go over there and expect what you're going to get in the United States, because that may not be true depending on where you're going. Right. I will say about 10 years ago, they started this process of the Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities. So I think 100 and some countries have signed it, but just because they've signed it doesn't mean they have legislation. It just means they want to, and they want to invite people there, but they don't maybe not really know what to do. So again, just I'll reiterate, don't expect the level of accessibility in other countries that you get in the United States. What I will say about other countries is most of them that I've been to will bend over backwards to help you. If you need extra help, all you have to do is ask. They'll be very apologetic that it's not accessible, but in other countries, they are more than happy to help you. I've had just wonderful people carry me down to the ocean. If I'm on a beach, all you have to do is ask. I've found that people in other countries are very friendly and very, very helpful. So tour companies, are they accessible? That's, again, I think I mentioned that on the cruising, but make sure before you go that you talk to whatever tour company you're with, whether it's a bus, make sure there's a lift, tell them what you need and make sure they have it, because you may show up and it may be different. But I'm a huge fan of doing your homework and having everything you need before you get there. So make sure they've worked with somebody with a disability before, and if they haven't, make sure they're comfortable trying it, because some people might be nervous, and in the United States, all they care about is liability. All right, so you may have to encourage them to say, hey, I don't need a lot of help, but I really think I can do this. What do you guys think? Check with your tour companies, get some advice from them. And then the last thing on here I did mention already. The cruising may be accessible, but the port city might not be. Sometimes it's just a matter of, it might be difficult to get off of the boat, right? Especially independently. All right, I think we're on to the last slide here, and then we can go get some questions. So these are my favorite travel agents that specialize in travel for people with disabilities and older travelers. They do a really wonderful job. So Wheel the World, they've been around for probably about 10 years, I want to say. But they pride themselves kind of being like the Expedia of disabled travel, right? So they're going to have everything you need. You can see down there on the bottom right, that picture, that's like a rickshaw type of device. That person is paralyzed, and they can organize trips. They're taking people in wheelchairs up to Machu Picchu and places like that now in devices like you see in that picture. So, at the very least, after today, I really hope that your brains have expanded a little bit and said, hey, you know what? There's a lot of stuff I can still get out and do. And it really, travel has been more exciting and more accessible than ever in the last 5 to 10 years. So I really encourage you guys to get out there. But Wheel the World is a wonderful website, and they can connect you with a lot of accessible features around the world. Same with Easy Access Travel. She has been in the travel world as a travel agent for 30 plus years. And, she, back when it was old school, you actually got on the phone, called the travel agent, and she sent you all your paper tickets and everything, right? It's a little bit different now. But Easy Access Travel is a wonderful one. So is Wheelchair Escapes. Sage Traveling is a buddy of mine named John Sage, and he's especially strong over in Europe. Pardon me. He's especially got a good presence over in Europe, but Sage Traveling is wonderful. And then, also, again, check with, if you're in another country, just check with whatever tour companies are there, and people may be willing just to, to help you out. But the other ones, especially at the top there, Wheel the World, they're going to point you in the right direction. They've already done a lot of the research to make sure that things are going to work. If you're an older traveler, slow walker, whatever it might be, they've already done that research. So, all right, looks like I'm right exactly on 2:45 here. Well, East Coast time. But that is the end of the presentation. Again, I just really hope you guys have expanded your thinking a little bit. And instead of thinking, well, I'm getting older, can't walk as well, not sure what I can still do, what I can still handle, there is a lot of places you can go and a lot of assistance provided, um, provided that you're willing to ask for it, right? But there's a lot of good things out there and a lot of amazing places to see still. So please keep traveling. I'm going to travel as long as until literally till they kick me off the airplane. I'm going to keep traveling.
That's amazing, Craig. Thank you again for this amazing presentation.
Mhm.
As you anticipated, we do have quite a few questions that came in. So I want
Good.
to take the next 10, 15 minutes or so to touch on some of those. So shall we take a stab?
Let's do it.
So, you talked a lot about, accessibility, right? Call ahead, work with, the places that you're going to be staying at, do your research, work with some other travel agents that are familiar with traveling with mobility and disability issues with which a lot
Mhm.
of patients that suffer from peripheral neuropathy have.
Yep.
So curious if you could maybe talk a little bit more about kind of affordability, right? Because I'm looking at some of these things, especially these travel agents, and also going to all of these, foreign countries. And I'm thinking to myself, and others are too, is wow, these are really expensive trips. So if I'm going somewhere that's a little maybe less fancy, am I going to have the same types of possibilities, or do I need to kind of pay to play, so to speak?
That's a great question. I think it depends really on what you're looking for. If you're going to go out of the country, obviously it's going to be an expense. Pretty much
Yeah.
any time you go, air travel has gotten very expensive because of fuel costs and things like that. So, if you're looking for the more affordability, I would say, your one tank of gas trips, your local stuff, things that you can drive to, or maybe a half day or full day train ride, to anywhere in the U.S. is going to be, I think, a lot more affordable than going outside of the country. But there are some places, such as Costa Rica and some other places that some of my friends like to go where the dollar goes a lot farther, right? Mexico is the
Yeah.
same thing. You can get into Mexico and stay at an all inclusive, very accessible resort, and it's a lot more affordable. I will say with inflation, things have got a lot more expensive. I've even felt it. We left Steamboat Springs, Colorado, um, because we just wanted something quieter and we wanted some land. And even where we are in Northeast Tennessee, where it's very affordable to live, now I'm looking at prices here at the grocery store and back there, and they're actually similar, which
Yeah.
is a little bit scary to me. I'm like, oh, I left that so I could have a more affordable life.
Yeah.
So I think again on affordability, I think if you stay in the country, you're gonna be a lot better off. And the if the travel agent is more of an expense and you don't mind doing your own research, I think that's a great way to go. My wife and I love doing the research ourselves. I love asking the questions because then I can tell my friends about it. Be like, we went to this place. It was really cool. Um, but that's probably the way to keep it most affordable is to
Okay.
stay in the U.S. Yeah.
Okay. And obviously staying within the US and doing road trips, right? So lots of folks that have peripheral neuropathy aren't able to drive due to some of their kind of lower extremities not having the
Hmm.
control that they once had. We at the Foundation for Peripheral Neuropathy, we did kind of a web series and educational programming on hand controlled driving.
I
But
was
folks
just
are
going to
just
say that. I just wrote hand controls down to talk about.
That's
So good.
amazing. So yeah, but I would love to hear if you're from, it sounds like you're familiar. So that's great. So could you talk a little bit more about that for folks that, again, maybe have some pain or numbness or other symptoms in their feet that prevent them from driving and doing kind of some of these travels that they would so wish that they could do?
Yeah, I mean, if your feet aren't working great, you still got these,
Yeah.
right? I've been driving with hand controls for a very long time. I broke my back in 1996. About a year and a half after I broke my back, maybe 2 years, I got my first car. And this is how easy it is to drive with hand controls. I picked up a used car in Denver, Colorado. And I drove for the very first time with hand controls from Denver up through the mountains over two 11,000-foot passes into Steamboat Springs. Very first time I did it. Um, if this is something you need, your insurance may very well pay for it. Mine certainly covers it because you can't drive without it. But mine is just installed. They actually drop the steering column down and they install it right in the steering column. But it's one handle underneath the left side of my steering wheel. You bend it down like this for gas and you push it forward for the brake. And then I'm allowed to have a steering knob, which you will if you drive with hand controls. You have a steering knob because if you're backing up, right, you're going to need to have one hand on the hand control and one on the wheel. So they used to call a suicide knob is illegal in most states unless you drive with hand controls. So that's more your permanent set. I want to say they cost probably a couple $1,000s, but I would check with your insurance company to see if they'll cover something like that. And then you can also buy a pair of portable hand controls for probably $400 or $500. They just have this two pads and you just lock them around your gas pedal or your brake pedal, and they just sit in your lap and you can drive like that. But honestly, pretty easy to drive with hand controls. Obviously, I've got a lot of experience in many years, but not a difficult transition at all. And for a few $100, you can get a set of hand controls that'll go on almost any car.
So that's amazing. And we here are also very familiar with that. So for folks that are interested in learning more, feel free to reach out to us separately. We can put you a little bit more in touch with some next steps and information. It's always best to be an informed consumer. So we're happy to help educate folks on that. So folks with neuropathy suffer sometimes from pain from sitting or, from doing something for too long, they get stiff. Do you have any thoughts on that, just in general, with respect to traveling and encouraging folks to, ultimately not let their pain, because that's their disability, get in
Mm-hmm.
the way from stopping them from doing what they would love to do, which is travel and just living a life that they would otherwise want to do?
Yeah, I think, and I've always said, and knock on wood, I'm very, very lucky that I don't live in pain. And I think being in constant pain is one of the hardest things you can deal with, and it's very disabling for people. So, um, you know, part of it, maybe just take your time getting somewhere. If you can only sit in the car and drive for a few hours, plan your trip so that you're going to stop somewhere cool and get out and see something. Um, but again, that's the hardest thing to deal with. And I do realize, I don't like to see, I don't like to think of it as people suffering, but more learning to live with your disability or whatever level of pain you might be in. I'm very much, I don't ever want to have to take painkillers and stuff like that. I don't like it. I think it clouds my brain and it makes my whole experience less enjoyable. So I try to not take any of that stuff. But again, I'm very lucky. I don't live in pain. Being a complete injury is actually an advantage. But this is a tough question because every single person that's experiencing this peripheral neuropathy, I know, is a different case, and everybody's is different in how they handle themselves, how much pain they're in, how much how long they can walk or handle something for. Um, but I would encourage, just taking your time getting somewhere. If it's a road trip and you can only sit in the car for a few hours, then, plan your trip around that. And then also leave it open. My wife used to love to plan every single detail of every trip. And when something didn't happen, she'd be disappointed. And I learned from that, so plan your trip, make a plan, but be okay if that plan doesn't work as well, because you may have to slow down or miss something, whatever it might be. I really hope this answers the question. This is a really tough one because everybody's in a different level of pain or not in pain, and everybody knows what they can and can't handle. But I would say more than anything, just slow down and take your time getting where you're going. I hope that answered the question.
I think it's good advice. And it's advice that I also have to remind myself. I'm such a planner and nothing
Mm-hmm.
ever goes to plan
Yeah.
100%. So, that's good feedback that I continue to remind myself. Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Mhm.
So, what do you do for accessibility when you are at the national parks or at a beach, right? Where you're in a wheelchair, you have a cane, maybe you have numbness or pain, stepping on small pebbles or beach, right? Like how do you navigate like the terrains, for fear of better words, when you don't have the paths and the care and the TSA folks with the ribbon around them helping you in any way that you can? How do you navigate just the outside, the world?
So, as I mentioned earlier, the world is becoming more accessible. So, national parks and monuments are actually very accessible. I even went to in southeast Colorado. There's a place called National Sand Dune or the Sand Dunes National Monument, and then it's this big 800-foot tall sand dunes at the base of the mountains because it's this big open plain between two mountain ranges, and the wind whips over there. And when it gets to the other mountain range, it drops the sand because it's too heavy to get over. Very cool place. You wouldn't think a person in a wheelchair like myself could even get around there. What they had was a beach wheelchair, right? So really popular at beaches now are two things: beach wheelchairs, which unfortunately are not self-ambulatory. You'll have to have somebody push you, but they're on big balloon tires and you can easily go across the sand. They even make, and you can Google this, they even make beach wheelchairs that are like kind of like this shape. There's one wheel in the front and two in the back,
Yeah.
and you can push the person right into the water. And guess what it does when it gets in the water? It floats.
I hope it floats. Okay, good.
It definitely floats. You're like, oh my God, what's he going to say here? No, it definitely floats. The other thing that you can do research on, and in Chicago on the beaches, you'll find there are a lot of beaches, partially thanks to our organization, that have beach mats. We call it their Moby mats is one of the brands. They're these big, heavy mats. They're about 8 feet wide. They roll out all the way down to the water. So if we're walking with a cane or you're in a wheelchair, you can actually navigate across the sand because there's a mat to take you down there. And other places, they're going even further and building wooden ramps and walkways right down to the beach. So if you Google accessible beaches, you'll actually find a lot of beaches around the country that have these beach mats, which are really cool. And then the national parks and monuments, some of the bigger ones also rent scooters. They have a lot of concrete and paved pathways. And some of them will even have loaner wheelchairs if you want, if you want to get pushed around. Um, Places like the Grand Canyon, for instance, there's a road along one of the ridges that you're not allowed to drive on. No cars are allowed. But if you've got one of those blue parking placards that says you can park in accessible parking spaces and you let them know, they let you drive up that road, right? So there's in some of the bigger parks, they're going to let you have access in your own vehicle that most other people are not going to have access to. So make sure you check with the park ahead of time and find out what they allow you to do, because that's all it is it's a reasonable
Yeah.
accommodation. That's what they call it.
Yes.
Nobody else can do it, but if you can't walk it and we don't have another option for you, we're going to let you drive it.
Oh, that's amazing. And I think as we kind of wrap this program up, as we're nearing the end of our hour, I think that's really important information, right? I think it's good for us to remember that we have to speak for ourselves, we have to ask questions, and there hopefully will be an alternative, especially within our country, but possibly also within a lot of the other bigger cities. I mean, remember you mentioning the Olympic cities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Folks, the cities that had the Olympics, they obviously had to be ADA accessible. And I think, again, folks that have mobility issues or other issues similar to what many neuropathy patients suffer from, I think there's going to be some accommodations. And if not, just ask, right?
Yeah,
Just
so there's a
ask and
lot more
slow down.
accessible options and a lot more help out there if you're willing to
Yeah.
ask than anybody even knows. There's a lot of programs out there, and most people just don't
Yeah.
know to ask, or they
Yeah.
just assume, I don't think I can do that. But you might be
Yeah.
surprised.
No, I learned so much from you, Craig. So again, thank you so very much for
Mhm.
today. There's always going to be an opportunity for us to do this again, another part two. I think there are so many other questions that we didn't have time to answer. So for that, I do apologize, but I'm
No
hopeful
question.
that Yeah, it's a good problem to have, but I'm hopeful that everyone that did participate today and will be viewing this recording in perpetuity on our website will learn at least one thing. And at the end of the day, that's what our educational programming is about, is making sure that you're educating yourself and you're leaving our programs just that much wiser. So, Craig, thank you for doing that for us today. We hope everyone enjoyed the program. Thank you again to CSL Behring for their sponsorship, and I hope everyone has a good remainder of your day. And let us know if you need anything else. Thank you again.
And Lindsay, just one thing, if you want to share my email with these folks, I'm happy to answer questions that didn't get answered. They're
Oh, that would
welcome
be
to
great.
email me on the side.
Okay, we'll put you in touch with them if and when that happens. So thank you, Craig. That's so kind.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful day.
All right, thank you, everyone. Bye bye.